Good morning all, and welcome back from your break. I hope you stocked up with something to drink there while we continue with the program. My name is Eddie Mienie, and I'm the Executive Director for Strategic and Security Studies and Partnerships for the College of Arts and Letters. It's my honor to introduce to you this morning the chair of panel number 1, Dr. Dan Papp. Dan, thanks so much again for agreeing to be with us this morning. We like having you here. Dr. Papp retired as president of Kennesaw State University in 2016. Since his retirement, he has served as president of Papp Consulting, undertaking consulting assignments in national security, higher ed programs, and recruitment. During his tenure as KSU president, Papp led the consolidation of KSU and Southern Polytech State University, making KSU one of the 50 largest public universities in the US with over 35,000 students and more than 3,000 faculty and staff. Dr. Papp's other accomplishments as KSU president include doubling the number of KSU bachelor and master's degree programs, initiating KSU's first doctoral programs, leading KSU's first capital campaign, a successful $75 million effort, adding over $500 million of new facilities, infrastructure, and property to KSU's inventory, guiding KSU into NCAA Division I athletics, including beginning intercollegiate football in 2015, implementing a new university governance structure, expanding KSU's externally funded research, increasing emphasis on experiential learning and online education, and doubling the size of KSU's study abroad program, including opening KSU's first international campus in Tuscany, Italy. Before becoming KSU president, Dr. Papp was Senior Vice Chancellor for Academics and Fiscal Affairs of the University System of Georgia. Earlier, he was Director of Education Programs for the University System's Electronic Design Project, Interim President of Southern Polytech, Executive Assistant to the President of Georgia Tech, Founding Director of Tech's Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, and Director of Tech's School of Social Sciences. Papp joined the Tech faculty in 1973. Dr. Papp has been visiting professor at the Western Australian Institute of Technology in Perth, visiting professor at Fudan University in Shanghai, and led study abroad programs to the Soviet Union, France, Germany, and Italy. He served as senior research scholar at both the Center for Aerospace Doctrine of the U.S. Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama, and the Strategic Studies Institute of the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The U.S. Army twice awarded him the Outstanding Civilian Service Medal. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate at Dartmouth College, Dr. Papp earned his PhD in International Affairs from the University of Miami. He is author or co-author of 7 books on U.S. and Soviet-Russian foreign policy and international relations, including Contemporary International Relations, published in 6 editions and used as a text in over 150 universities and colleges, and American Foreign Policy, History, Politics, Policies, also used in over 100 universities and colleges. Dr. Papp has also edited 6 other books, including Secretary of State Dean Rusk's autobiography, As I Saw It, and written over 80 published journal articles and chapters. Dr. Papp's previous community activities include working closely with the Atlanta-based Southern Center for International Studies, serving as captain of both the Miami and Atlanta rugby football clubs, serving on the Church Council of the Lutheran Church of the Resurrection, and coaching youth basketball and football programs. Dr. Papp and his wife Sue live in Marietta, Georgia. They have 4 sons, William, Alexander, Michael, and Benjamin, and 5 grandchildren. Dr. Papp, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mienie, and it's a pleasure to be back up here in Dahlonega at the University of North Georgia once again, and welcome everyone to the first panel at this year's UNG National Security Symposium. When our panel was created several months ago, it was then appropriately titled, How Higher Education Fills the Security Gap in the Post-Cold War Era. However, given events of the last few weeks, I'm taking the chair's prerogative and renaming and retitling our panel, How Higher Education Will Fill the Security Gap in the New Cold War Era. We have 5 excellent presentations this morning, so in the interest of providing opportunities for the presentations and for discussions, I've asked each presenter to make their comments and presentations in 10 minutes or less. So let's begin immediately this morning with our first presentation by Dr. Dlynn Armstrong Williams, Professor of Political Science and Head of UNG's Department of Political Science and International Affairs. Dr. Armstrong Williams came to North Georgia in 1997 after completing her PhD at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Dr. Armstrong Williams was founding director of UNG's Center for Global Engagement, with her research and teaching focusing on international security, East Asian politics, comparative foreign policy, and international relations theory. She has received UNG awards for both her scholarship and her teaching. Dr. Armstrong Williams' presentation this morning is entitled A State University's Responsiveness to Security Education Needs. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone for joining me today. What I'm going to be sharing with you is sort of an exemplar about what a state university can do to address these needs and to fill the gap that we see really in security education. So we'll see. Wonderful. So it works. So just to give you a little bit of context, Colonel Billy Wells is here, Dr. Billy Wells now. So he was my supervisor at one point during my career here at the University of North Georgia, and he was critical to the issues and the efforts that we're going to talk about. Really, what he was critical at was breaking down those silos that really we were talking about in the opening speaker. So we really began our efforts here in about 2007. The university was slightly different. This is prior to consolidation, and these numbers are from memory, so please don't, these numbers could be slightly off. I've been here a long time, and I can't remember what we had each year. So one of the things that you have to understand, I think, for securitization issues is because we saw major concerns in the area of student preparedness, really in cross-cultural understanding. And so linked to that, we initiated a campus-wide international plan, and that campus-wide international plan could integrate many of the things that the original speaker discussed. Exchanges, opportunities, international internships, and a very strong curriculum so that students are prepared to really be global leaders and to build those bridges between higher education, business, and the military. So as part of those efforts, what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of this context. So we were trying to get kind of a finger on the pulse of what was happening in these desired transitions in higher education and security. But really, I think what provided that more national context was a HASC report. Okay, so the House Armed Services Committee provided this report, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but it talked about troop readiness and the fact that we were really confronting some issues in the wake of 9/11, and we saw that really we did not have a systematic approach to curricular change in making sure those that served in the military and security arenas were well-versed in not only foreign cultures, but also foreign languages. And we decided at this university that we were going to try to fill that gap. And so you'll see from this report that our efforts really kind of gelled well with what was occurring at the national level. And I can't speak to this enough because this is one of the things we're struggling with now, and we'll come back to that when I get to challenges. So if you see the HASC report, if you ever have a chance to see it, so in 2008, it really talked about that we understood that we were a little bit behind in understanding regional expertise and language and what at the time we called cross-cultural skills. So as a university, we decided and discussed how to respond. So the Dean of Arts and Letters, as well as the deans of all of our schools, myself, Dr. Wells, we got together and we talked about how we should best approach this. At this same time, Cadet Command for the U.S. Army was also looking at these questions. And so you'll see a synergy here that allowed us to push the envelope here at a university in lovely rural Georgia. And I think that that is the key, that we expand these efforts beyond the Beltway, and we expand these efforts so that we can really make this a national issue. So this is how we responded curricularly. We had a lot of things that we thought we could do to really help soldiers and those that we were commissioning become more ready for this new reality, this more globally integrated reality. So in 2007, we launched an international affairs degree. And this international affairs degree was very successful initially. The general courses you will see here, we wanted to make sure that students had a background in international relations and comparative politics, because we were trying to give them that regional specialization, but also we wanted them to understand a global political context as well as a global political economy context for all of these major questions. So because of that, the degree allowed students to take these formative courses, and then students had to choose a regional area of expertise. They couldn't be generalists. So we have 4 areas of expertise, which are outlined on the slide, and students were required to take foreign languages up to the 2000 level, but we strongly encouraged 3,000 and 4,000 level language acquisition, particularly in strategic languages where we felt that there was a gap. So in this regional area of concentration, you'll see that students could take history of that particular region, international studies focused on that region, upper division language focused on that region. This allowed, when I talk to incoming students, I tell them that they then have the opportunity to look through a microscope as well as a telescope, right? International relations is a telescope kind of vision of the international system, and the comparative politics gives them the microscope vision, so they can get down to the nitty-gritty cultural issues that are different in every country in their region, as well as regional differences across the world. We require an international internship in this degree. That international internship has to be within your region, and that international internship has to have 60% cross-cultural interaction with individuals in the region. I was very blessed to have interned with the State Department, as well as been a Fulbright scholar. I had a lot of background in this, and what I found was that many students, while they spoke a language, or they could handle themselves in an elite environment at university, which many universities across the world are, they very much struggled in day-to-day cultural interactions in country. So because of that, this internship is to give them those day-to-day interactions with 60% of that time working with people in that country. And it was very important to me that we offered that. The study abroad experiences, students have to spend at least 25 days in country, but we encourage them to do a semester of study. That allows them to have those regional courses in region, which assists, and it gives them, of course, more cross-cultural competency because they're living in that country during those experiences. So we really encouraged this, and as part of that, because I transitioned between the political science department and running essentially our international education office at the time, we were able to build strategic partnerships that served our students' needs. So for example, we were able to build internships with the Asia Pacific Security Center because, of course, we have an Asian region. We're very interested in security studies, so we build that partnership. We also have the ability to choose partnerships. For example, I'm a Korean specialist. We chose a partnership with Sogong because they trained a variety of diplomats and governmental service people in Korea. So we were able to choose partnerships strategically, which became very important to make them more viable for this degree. So why did we get synergy? And this is what I want to talk about a little bit before I talk about the challenges. At the same time, in higher education, which you're going to hear in kind of the higher education nomenclature, is high impact practices, right? So while we were trying to do this with support of the HASC, we also have a lot of transitions in higher education nationally. And these high impact practices are study abroad, internships, a capstone experience, all which were integrated into the degree. So while we had some momentum on the military side, we also had momentum on the higher ed side. So linked to that, we then were able to integrate a variety of high impact practices into what we were doing. So here are the challenges. The first speaker talked about these stovepipes. Honestly, one of the first challenges we had was when Cadet Command, what they did was they narrowed their camp dates. Camp dates used to be spread across the entire summer. They narrowed them into the center of the summer. Before we could send kids abroad before camp or after camp, that became very, very difficult. Those challenges then impacted time to commission, which becomes another challenge that we have. So that kind of transition of camp dates impacted us greatly. The other issue we faced is, of course, international internships and study abroad cost money. And so we were able to partner with Olmsted and other agencies, right? Many of our students get Gilman scholarships, Freeman Asia scholarships, because they are studying these strategic languages, know these areas of the world. We've been able to increase our competitiveness and national scholarships as a department. So in the past 5 or 6 years, we've gotten about $1.7 million in scholarships for our students who are linked to this because they have this skill set. COVID, of course, has impacted us dramatically, so it's impacted us on this availability. So some of these high impact practices we've had to modify, and that's been a huge challenge for us. The other thing is we have professional military education requirements, and hopefully everyone in this room is somewhat familiar with those. So sometimes there's issues of communication because once we set those, we don't want to mess with them too much, right? Because now we know what they are in a student's plan of study to assist them to graduate. So there's been issues sometimes in communication between professional military education requirements and what academic units are doing, which is part of that stovetop issue. The other thing, of course, is that most of our cadets are contracted, and because they're contracted, they have a certain time to graduate. Now, to be honest, what's given us flexibility is a lot of the cadets that join us tend to be high flyers. So the cadets that choose these majors that are increasingly challenging, they tend to either CLEP out of courses or they tend to dual enroll out of courses, which allows us more time in their plan of study to allow them to take advantage of these opportunities. So, where are we now? So I wanted to show you kind of a graph for majors in my department so you can also understand other, I would say, national challenges to what we're facing. You'll see that our international affairs degree, which is the orange line, it peaked right in the center of that graph. Well, it peaked at a time period where the military, we'll say business leaders, et cetera, were all talking about globalization, all talking about preparing leaders for this external world. We've seen the United States become increasingly inward turning. And as it becomes inward turning, then what occurs is there's less and less of this discussion out there. In fact, I remember I was confronted at one point and told that study abroad was anti-American. And it was anti-American. I said, no, the DOD is asking me to do this. And they're like, no, it's anti-American because Americans just need to stay here. So we can't take this out of the global political context of the United States, I think, and we have to see how this is impacting us. You'll also see these numbers are impacted, and you'll see it nationally with declining enrollments in language education as well. We are struggling to try to make sure that we get individuals in the United States and elsewhere to understand the importance of this globalization effort for future U.S. competitiveness and for strategic security reasons. And so this is where we need your help, and we need to have more and more people engaging in this conversation. The other thing I want to point out to you is now that we feel that our students have this basis in cultural understanding, knowledge, they've spent time abroad, they've had these international experiences, what we think is our next challenge is sort of where we're going. One of the things that I'm seeing as the department head of political science and international affairs, and what we will talk about a lot, is cyber warfare and what's called the changing operational informational environment. One of the issues when we talk about cyber, we talk about escalating messages, right? Trying to reinforce messages that really serve our strategic interest. One of the questions is, if you don't have the cultural understanding of particular regions, it's incredibly difficult to re-emphasize those messages properly. So one of the things that my department's looking at, and this is where I think this stovepiping thing can come into play, is we're looking at, well, how do we do this, and how do we emphasize what we are really interested in, the values of the United States. So because of that, we see more and more digital efforts by the Department of State. We see more and more digital efforts in diplomacy, but not just due to COVID, but because this is where the dialogues are taking place. And so my department is looking at a possibility of integrating in a particular course some skill sets that could help our students not only navigate that informational space, but maybe start to adjust it themselves based on U.S. strategic interests. So one of the things we're considering is introducing, we talk about bureaucracy in higher ed. So we here have to introduce courses as special topics to prove that we'll have enrollment, to prove that we have interest in those courses. That process can take a year and a half. Then by the time I introduce the course, it then takes almost another year and a half to 2 years to get that course into the curriculum. But one of the things we're interested in is we already have a course in political polarity within the curriculum. We're really interested in looking at the role of information management and information manipulation and disinformation that enhances polarity around the world. And so we hope that through this course, we'll be able to educate students about these efforts and also make them more aware about how to effectively assess information to understand if they are being manipulated in an international context. So essentially, we are facing a variety of challenges, but I think the answer to those challenges is an integrated curriculum that utilizes higher ed as well as military folks. But we have to communicate about those threats clearly so that then we see where we can change the curriculum to more effectively address those issues. Thank you.
Great. And thank you, Dlynn. If there are questions for Dlynn or for any of the other presenters, we'll handle that after all 5 of the presentations are made. Our second presentation this morning is by Dr. Cristian Harris, Professor of Political Science here at University of North Georgia, and a member of UNG's faculty since 2005, after having taught in Delaware, New Jersey, and Texas. Holding a PhD from the University of Delaware, Dr. Harris is the program coordinator for UNG's Masters in International Affairs. In 2018, he was awarded the university's highest recognition, the Distinguished Teaching Award, as well as other teaching awards. Dr. Harris's research interests include the role of U.S. universities in public diplomacy and the political economy of Latin America. Dr. Harris's presentation is entitled International Education and Public Diplomacy. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that I'm going to be facing an awkward moment. This is probably going to be a presentation which is not going to be followed by a question whether this is going to be on the test or not. The U.S. government and institutions of higher education have had a long and at times troubled relationship. As a reminder, 2022 is the 160-year anniversary of the Land-Grant College Act. My presentation today focuses on the international aspects of such a relationship. My references to the U.S. government concern the role of the federal government. U.S. government initiatives in international education form part of what we call public diplomacy. Public diplomacy is defined as the government's effort to communicate directly with foreign publics in order to bring an understanding of its country's ideas, values, institutions, culture, and its policies. The most visible manifestations of public diplomacy are cultural and academic exchanges, student exchanges, military exchange programs, foreign broadcasting services, cultural centers and libraries, language institutes, art exhibitions, and cultural performances. Public diplomacy initiatives found fertile ground in U.S. universities. Freedom to pursue research, rigorous peer review evaluation of a scholarship, and the link between research and teaching develop into a vital component of U.S. soft power. U.S. universities, both private and public, emerged as the most globally oriented universities in the world, and in turn became the model for other institutions of higher education around the world. U.S. universities attracted and retained talent from the very regions and disciplines they were studying. And those students and scholars chose to make their careers in U.S. universities, giving the U.S. an edge on its relations with other countries. Thus, public diplomacy initiatives facilitated the creation of U.S. intellectual capital and became valuable instruments of U.S. soft power. I will argue to you today that government policy has had a significant role in the formation of international affairs specialists in academia, think tanks, and even in the government itself. Moreover, private foundations like the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, and the Rockefeller Foundation provided additional assistance to support the work of scholars and helped to build a domestic consensus around the importance of international education and scholarship. During World War II, the U.S. government helped train linguistic and regional studies specialists. However, it was during the Cold War that internationalization became a national security priority. It resulted in the formation of a remarkable group of scholars and students who possessed the linguistic skills, historical understandings, and analytical intellectual curiosity to engage with the world. During the Cold War, the U.S. government funded several now iconic initiatives. The U.S. Information and Educational Exchange Act of 1948 had the goal to communicate with foreign audiences and promote educational, cultural, and technical exchanges. It placed the Voice of America broadcast under the State Department. The National Defense Education Act of 1958, which was triggered by the launching of the Sputnik satellite, expanded federal assistance for regional studies and advanced language training, and had the long-term consequence of boosting college enrollments. The Mutual Educational and Cultural Exchange Act of 1961, also known as the Fulbright-Hays Act, supported international academic and cultural exchanges. The Higher Education Act of 1965 reinforced the role of colleges and universities and increased financial assistance to students at the post-secondary level. One of its legacies is the creation of the Pell Grants. The National Security Education Act of 1991 had the goal of training a new generation of international affairs specialists for the post-Cold War era. The Boren Awards, consisting of scholarships and fellowships for undergraduate and graduate students, intended to provide financial assistance for foreign language study in return for work in federal government after completing the program. It also consolidated other initiatives like Language Flagship and the Project Go, or known as Project Global Officer. In closing, current changes to the commitment to international education and research pose a serious problem to the U.S. standing in the world. This is happening at a critical time in the history of the U.S. The U.S. is facing the rise of new challenges and challengers alongside traditional threats to its national security. Understanding and preparing to face these challenges and challengers require a body of experts trained in foreign languages, transnational studies, and international relations. U.S. universities are facing a competitive environment of their own, which is now defined by global forces. Shifting public priorities and a waning domestic consensus undermine the intellectual capital and power of the United States and risk weakening national readiness. Investing in build-to-hard to acquire skills requires a long-term commitment, free from political interference. Over the short term, supporting international education is unlikely to yield immediate results and risks creating the impression that academia and U.S. universities cannot provide the answers. However, support for international education and research gives the U.S. an edge on its relations with other countries. Given the uncertainty of where future crises will come from, developing the intellectual capital of the U.S. is a critical investment in its national security. Thank you.
And thank you, Cristian. Our next presentation this morning is by Dr. Craig Greathouse, Professor of Political Science and Associate Department Head here at UNG. Craig holds a PhD in Political Science from Claremont Graduate School. Dr. Greathouse has published articles on European foreign policy, security and defense policy, strategic culture, strategic thought, international relations theory, and cyber war. He also designs and runs simulations on the international system, which he has presented to the National Defense University and other elements of the U.S. military. He also helped create and is advisor for UNG's Masters of Arts in International Affairs. Dr. Greathouse's presentation is entitled Graduate Education and National Security, Expanding Understanding. Craig?
Okay, thank you. So this presentation is going to give a brief overview of where we need to look at in terms of graduate education, in terms of national security, specifically national security. So when we start to talk about graduate education, I want to have a common definition for everybody in the room. We're talking about basically education leading to a master's or doctorate post-baccalaureate level. We're not talking about issues of basically certificates. Certificates are skill building, but they don't build the critical thinking skills across the broad range that a master's or a PhD will. So when we want to focus on building skill set and broader thinking, you want to look at building those degrees at the master's or PhD level. And then we're going to address problems of what we're seeing now with the online scam schools and some of the online education, which I'll talk about here. Now, when we start to talk about the importance of graduate degrees, I try not to push kids towards PhDs unless they really want it. PhDs are about creating that cutting edge knowledge, but you're also spending a huge amount of time. You're spending years having to learn that. You're spending years having to build that level. There's also a cost and time commitment that has to go along with PhDs. You could have anywhere from 7 to 10 years into that. And that may be a problem before you get out and are productive. Whereas if you're talking with a master's degree, anywhere 2 years, or if you're doing it part-time, 3 or 4. Okay. So one of the things that I think we need to look at when we're talking about national security is looking more at the master's degree, because it builds on those basic skills from the bachelor's. It takes what you're using and expands on that. You're not having to get into the area of cutting edge and learning the newest methods and learning, everything that's ever been written on a topic. You can get into a skill set. You expand your critical thinking, you expand your writing and analytical skills in going through this level if you're held to the standards. You're going to get a basic understanding of methodology. No, you're not going to get to the highest level of statistical analysis and everything else. But you are going to gain an understanding of methodology, use of data, and basically creating integrated research projects. Those are critical ideas about being able to operate and process and present information going forward. You're also going to start to really learn how to use theoretical frameworks and other heuristic devices which allow for very consistent analysis. And it also allows you to understand where your biases are if you're effectively using those theories and heuristic devices. So when we're starting to talk about these bachelor's degrees related to national security, and that's what I focused on, there are certain areas, degrees where they directly connect and it's an easy talk. So international relations, security studies, political science, specifically when we talk about comparative politics, which gives us the area studies, and also public policy issues, how you create and run policy. Geography and GIS systems, sociology and anthropology, most people don't think about these, but understanding cultures at their baseline. Okay. Economics, the role of economics in the world matters. Computer science, and that leads to issues of cybersecurity. Then modern history, and I need to stress this, understanding Europe in 1100 is nice. But understanding Europe in the 20th century leading into the 21st century is much more useful. So there may be historians out there, but it's the modern. And then language, understanding how the people communicate is an important element. So when you start to look at some of these, we can break these master's degrees down and some of these areas down. Do they give you a broad scope or do they give you very narrow information? International relations, by its nature, is designed to give you that broader focus, to give you that, why are things happening? Economics can also give you that. But then you look at some of the other degrees, they provide those specifics that you can't get anyplace else, that economics and international relations are not going to give you. Strategic studies is a very specific literature that you're going to get into. Cybersecurity is a very specific literature. Language, geography. So you need both, but you can't go one without the other. And what we've seen over the past years is you lose, if you're not focusing on those big picture ones, you start to lose an understanding of what's going on in the system. For example, the understanding of why the state works and non-state actors. If you look at Russia, what they've done over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, they're not engaged in cyber war, but they've got a lot of non-state actors that are connected to them that are directly engaged in that. So you need to understand that relationship. If you look at what's just happened, where a lot of people are reacting to Ukraine currently, and you had a lot of people come out and say, well, the U.S. should put a no-fly zone on. What's the impact if you do that? What's the international influence if you start to put U.S. fighter pilots directly in conflict with Russian fighter pilots, right? What happens? So, when we started to build in basically 2009, it came online, I believe, the Masters in International Affairs, we looked at the broader issues, and that's what we wanted to create. What does somebody need to know in order to address and become effective within the broader idea of being an analyst? So some of our foundational courses, U.S. foreign policy and the processes, IR theory and theory of comparative politics, so those theoretical frameworks to understand, international political economy, because once I take the economic model and put it into politics, it's a very different player. International security, global governance, research methods, and then they build a capstone. So you have to take and tie all of that together. And then we did put in some specific classes, both region and security focused. So when we built our masters, we tried to give you, here's the broader focus, and then give you some expertise if you wanted it. What we've seen since, especially 9/11, is you get a lot of people pushing flavors of the moment. The focus on terrorism studies post 9/11, everybody wanted to study terrorism, and they forgot some of the bigger problems. Terrorism's an element, it's an outcome of certain bigger things. Intelligence studies is important, but if you focus only on that, how do you create the context of understanding within that process, right? Security studies, it's the same thing. It's a narrow field. You've got to give them the broader picture beyond just the security studies. Language gives you some stuff, but it doesn't give you everything. So you have to be able to balance. And then we get to the problems of what we've seen with the new online scam universities. There's a lot of good online programs, but there's a lot of junk out there that have taken advantage of a lot of people. And what you've got is they have very canned content. They have limited time. Most of their degrees, they say you can get a degree basically doing all your classes in 8 weeks. Limited reading. To give you one example of one university, online university I know, they limit the reading to 100 pages a week. Okay? You just can't understand the field. They tend to be focused on predatory, focused on VA, military benefits. Why? Because that's a money source. They tend to have predatory, advertising. They tend to be more expensive, and they tend to provide faculty who may not know what they're talking about. That's a significant problem if you're expecting to train people for these issues going forward. So when we talk about graduate education as an element to help with U.S. national security, you don't need certificates, you don't need badging, you need the full development of degrees. Learn how to think, you need the bigger development. I would argue you have to focus on the MA level rather than the PhD. You're still going to need the PhDs, but the PhD level is extremely difficult, and usually about 50% don't survive that process that started, all right? You need a combination of big picture and specific programs. And then you've also got to deal with an environment where you've got limited degrees and bad actors out in the field. So you're dealing with a very difficult environment, and how do you address that, and where do you address that?
Thank you, Craig. That was extremely enlightening, and I completely agree with almost 110% of what you said. Our next presentation this morning is by Dr. Eddie Mienie, Professor of Strategic and Security Studies, also here at the University of North Georgia. Eddie holds a PhD in International Conflict Management from Kennesaw State University. Before entering the academic world, Dr. Mienie served as the Republic of South Africa's Deputy Ambassador to Switzerland and the political advisor to South Africa's Ambassador to the United States. He also served in the South African military and saw active duty in the field during the Angolan Civil War. Dr. Mienie has also consulted for both applied software technology and SAP software. Dr. Mienie's presentation is entitled UNG's Strategic and Security Studies Program, Meeting a National Need. Eddie?
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I thought the presentation by General Brown was just spot on. It was a brilliant opening address to this conference. And I was very happy to hear a number of factors that he touched on. We here at UNG are tracking with that. We are implementing that. And I'd like to just revisit some of these factors that he had mentioned so that you can see further in my presentation how we are tracking with that, how we are implementing these factors that General Brown had addressed. He spoke about higher ed and the US military needing a strong relationship with each other. As a senior military college, I can assure you, you'll see later on, that we have not only a strong relationship, an existing relationship, but we continue to build and make it even stronger. He mentioned that we are now in an era where war is being waged through other means, that we are no longer in a war or a peace situation, that there's a blurring of the line. In other words, we are facing today multifaceted threats to our national security interests. And we here at UNG, under the leadership of, in particular, Dr. Billy Wells and our Dean of our College of Arts and Letters, birthed a degree program called Strategic and Security Studies. And so I'm going to be speaking to you from that perspective, directing the program. UNG's effort in establishing international internships, reaching out to foreign military academies where we can place our students to expose them to a foreign culture, where they can come back a more well-rounded student is well on track. We also here at UNG have visiting cadets from foreign military academies where, as General Brown was saying, ties and relationships that are cemented at this level, at this early age in their career, is invaluable as these cadets become eventually generals within their own military. What a wonderful situation to have the option of picking up a phone and speaking informally with somebody that you had met 30 years ago studying at your institution. Invaluable. So I would like to let you know that UNG's leadership in response to this multifaceted threat that we face and the birthing of the Strategic and Security Studies program is in alignment with UNG's strategic plan. you'll see the why that we addressed here, that births the degree program. A national need for graduates trained in security affairs and with advanced abilities in critical languages as well as a study abroad experience is essential. So in terms of our strategic plan at UNG, Objective 1 and 4, Objective 1 and 3, we are in sync with that as far as our program is concerned. Creating academic programs designed to prepare ROTC students to succeed in a globalized high-tech world. How do we implement this? We cultivate high-quality interdisciplinary programs, which strategic and security studies is, that integrate innovative and emerging technologies, including distance learning. Objective 3 of UNG's strategic plan is that UNG will become a leader in internationalized learning with an emphasis on globalization and the needs of an emerging and military workforce. How do we implement that? We ensure that the military education academic program meets the needs of the next generation of military officers and supports foundational competencies for effective leadership in complex and uncertain environments. So the intent of our program, preparing ROTC and civilian students for careers in public and private sector security with emphasis on military and international applications, consistent with nationally accepted trends and standards in the discipline. The program allows students to pursue the degree in an area that meets their interest and their ability. The option to pursue one of 7 concentrations now that we have within the bachelor's degree program that makes the program both comprehensive and flexible. And then focusing on issues of national security from the US governmental level, including military, as well as civilian agencies and international security issues for private sector entities, including businesses and NGOs. So what's our mission statement? To educate and prepare the next generation of Army and civilian leaders for national security, foreign policy, and corporate careers, or to enter graduate programs. Our goals. To accomplish our mission, this program seeks to educate strategic thinkers to grasp complex international problems, to identify strategic challenges for the United States, to analyze historical precedents and geopolitical contexts, to identify appropriate solutions to strategic or national security solutions, and to promote creative interdisciplinary thinkers who can apply learned skills to the intricacies of national security, strategy, and international relations. What type of jobs do our students move on to? So, military service. We educate cadets to have the intellectual ability to understand and wrestle with a changing strategic climate. We train cadets to be professional, effective junior officers in the US Army. So Defense, State Department, Homeland Security are just a small number of federal agencies that would be interested in our graduates. For instance, Defense Policy Board Advisory Committee is where our students can find themselves ultimately working. Regional Desk for Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the Department of State. And another State Department area would be regional desks for the Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Regional Desk for Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security Affairs. The Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the Department of State, Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation, and the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at Homeland Security. What about the intelligence community? Intelligence being one of the concentrations that I mentioned, that we have 7. So I've just mentioned 3. Of course, we have 18 agencies within the intelligence community. But the CIA, Operations Analysis, the Directorate for Science and Technology, and for Digital Innovation. DIA, Analysis, Science and Technology. NSA, we have, you may hear now after my next colleague, we have a Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense Education at this university, which is another big initiative from our side. We have students, currently I have a student who's accepted a position with the Secret Service. Army Intelligence is another one of the students that's graduating now. In 3 weeks' time, will be entering Army Intelligence. We have a student that has accepted a position at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Civilian jobs, think tanks. These are think tanks that our students can move on to, our graduates. We encourage them, of course, to do a master's, thinking about working at a think tank. But anyway, I've listed a number over there. There's federally funded research and development centers, which would be another area of interest for our graduates. And then multinational corporations who are interested in enterprise risk management. If you take a global corporation like, let's say, Coca-Cola, they are dependent on third world countries. Some of the raw materials are going into the drinks that we drink. If there's an impact on the supply chain, there needs to be an early warning system in place so that alternative arrangements could be made to obtain those materials, those resources elsewhere. So GE, the same thing, Amazon, Microsoft, Lockheed Martin, oil and gas companies. Graduate schools where our students would be looking, some are listed there: Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, Missouri State Defense, Texas A&M, American University School, and University of Texas, LBJ, School of Public Affairs. We have common curriculum here, 21 hours, and the courses that we offer there is American Military History. These are compulsory courses: War and Society, International Relations Theory, Intro to Strategic and Security Studies, Comparative Security Issues, U.S. National Security Policy, and Military Geography. There are student learning outcomes specific to each one of these 7 concentrations that I've got listed there. Currently, we have 91 majors in the program. It's come down slightly, but that's a general trend nationwide. COVID having no small impact on that, and of course funding is another issue. But the concentration that's the most popular at the moment is intelligence, followed by military science, history, and then cybersecurity. So the delivery of the program, 21 hours of common curriculum, and we have 21 credit hours in the 7 concentrations. Per concentration, 21 hours. We have a study abroad requirement. You cannot graduate with your diploma unless you've done a study abroad. We're very intentional about that, or an international internship. We have 6 hours electives, and the ROTC students can choose any one of those 7 concentrations, whereas the military science concentration is not for our civilian students. And of course, the method of instruction delivery is mainly in class and online. I've already addressed the study abroad. So we collaborate well with the Center for Global Engagement, which also falls under Dr. Billy Wells, to get our students situated and identify an appropriate study abroad opportunity for them. And then the student learning outcomes is set at the course level, and the administration of the program. Again, the program falls under the auspices of the Department of Political Science and International Affairs, but we have stakeholders as well. Each one of the 7 concentrations, we collaborate with the department heads of those concentrations. So that's it. Thanks, Dan. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Mienie. And our final presentation this morning will be by Dr. Bryson Payne, Professor of Computer Science, also here at the University of North Georgia. Dr. Payne holds a PhD in Computer Science from Georgia State University and has been a member of UNG's faculty since 1998. He is the founding director of the university's Institute for Cyber Operations, which is an NSA DHS Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense. Dr. Payne has a host of publications focusing on computer education, computer security, computer use, and computing methodology. Dr. Payne.
Thank you, Dr. Papp. It's my pleasure to be able to close out the panel presentations for this session with an applied example of how higher education can impact security, specifically national security, through some interdisciplinary research that Dr. Mienie and I have been able to pursue over these past 2 years with some undergraduate students. We're working with a capstone student this semester in presenting some of this research over the summer. So I'll share with you an applied framework that came out of this interdisciplinary effort. Two of my fellow panelists have already mentioned the programs that they were instrumental in developing under Dr. Wells' leadership. The Center for Cyber Operations, which is now the Institute for Cyber Operations, was also due in great part to Dr. Wells' leadership. I've been fortunate to be a part of that center and institute for the past 6 years. And we think that this is an example of the type of applied research that we can put into use in training, not just our soldiers, our employees, but our citizens. And this is an application of counterintelligence training to cybersecurity education. And we're going to use the mice and rascals frameworks. Ooh, pardon me there. Let's try that again. We're going to talk about the mice and rascals frameworks. Those of you who've worked in intelligence may have already seen one or both of these abbreviations, these acronyms. Traditionally, the 5 main triggers for converting a foreign asset into a spy to go against not only their best interest, but potentially the best interest of their country are money, ideology, coercion or compromise, ego and extortion, and grievance. We call this the MICE or MICE plus G framework. And those triggers are effective because of certain psychological components of just being a social human being. So the Rascals framework is a little more nuanced approach to the motivation, the psychological tricks that cause us to fall for a money trigger or an ideology trigger. So Rascals stands for reciprocation, authority, scarcity, commitment or consistency, liking, and social proof. So what we're doing with these frameworks is applying them to cybersecurity training. We've all received training either from our schools or from our employers or our government organizations on resisting phishing. Has everybody gotten that training? All right, just making sure. We know that people are out to get our login credentials, our personal details, our organizational information, even access to our systems. But we tend to forget those, or we tend to fail to be able to apply them behaviorally when it's 5:30 on a Friday evening and you're trying to head home and you get an email that the CFO needs something, or an officer has requested that you get this turned in before you leave. And doggone it, we just do it, right? We get it done, even though we may not have checked to see if that was an authentic request from the right individual. The same thing happens when we're traveling abroad and we get an alert that someone logged into our account, and we click that link and we give someone access to our account. So what we want to do is to be able to apply a counterintelligence framework, the same kind of training that we provide for our cadets or our students before they go on one of these study abroad opportunities through the university. We make them aware that they may be exposed to intelligence operations while they're overseas, especially if they're traveling overseas in their uniform or for an official event in cyber and military science with another military institution overseas. So we've been warned against the dangers of social engineering. As we've seen, though, in 85% of the breaches that get publicized, social engineering is often the way that an adversary gets inside your network or gets access to your systems. So our training is not as effective as it could be. Social engineering is just deceiving an individual into doing something that's against their best interest or against the best interest of their organization or their nation. So just like our students have to become aware, our cadets have to become aware before they travel overseas that they may be a target, we all need to understand that every time we interact with our phones, whether it's to respond to a text message, whether it's to open a link or an email, or even to answer a phone call. Has anyone gotten phone calls that were pretending to be your automotive manufacturer, the IRS, the whoever it might be? So these tactics and techniques are not just limited to email. We think of that when we think of cyber, but they're coming at us from multinational criminal organizations and nation-state actors, terrorist organizations, in the form of text messages, phone calls, all of the different ways that technology has allowed us to become accessible. So the first step in this training is helping our students and eventually our subjects in the research study understand that they are a target, not just in the general sense that we're all a target, but just about any time you open your email, if you scroll down far enough or open your spam folder, you can find one of those emails asking you to click through, telling you that you'll miss out on this opportunity or somebody has accessed your information. You better protect yourself. Just click, or a spam message or spam phone call. So realizing that you are an intentional target, the individual, every individual is a target, is a key. So the goal of this framework is to help our students take this counterintelligence-based cyber training more seriously and retain the information better. But perhaps more importantly, our hypothesis is that the participants in this counterintelligence training will be better able to respond behaviorally in the moment, even if they're leaving work at the end of the day, even if they're traveling overseas. We want our employees, our citizens, our soldiers to be better equipped to respond to these threats. So I'll just hit a few of the main triggers. You've all seen these in social engineering training or phishing training at work, I'm sure, or through school. But for money, money is the bait. Do this to get money, or your money is in danger. This is Bank of America telling you your login has been accessed from Beijing. Click here to if this wasn't you, well, we can click through if we're not careful. And it's not that we don't have the knowledge, it's that if you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, leaving at the end of the day, traveling overseas in a different environment, in a hurry, under pressure, you still may fail even though you've had that training, even though you understand the dangers. We want people to be able to apply these lessons behaviorally. So there was a great example recently where some public figures' Twitter accounts were hacked, and they were claiming to give, if you'll send me a Bitcoin, I'll send you back 2. How people fall for these things, well, unfortunately, lots of people do. For ideology, and we're not just talking about extremism or polarized ideology. It could just be, hey, you really support this cause or this belief, here's a chance to give money. And we've seen scams like this recently to support Ukraine, donate to Ukraine. There are lists of fake websites out there, organizations pretending to send money to support Ukraine. Coercion or compromise, this still works in every setting, right? If you don't take care of this, if you don't send me some money, I'm going to release this information about you, release this video of you, release your email history. All of the ransomware attacks out there right now fall easily under the coercion. And ego can be used against us, turned against us, perhaps even more easily than the previous 3. Even famous hackers like Kevin Mitnick, one of the most infamous hackers out there, who now runs a security consulting company, was goaded into attacking a fellow hacker several years ago, and all it took was a little bit of social engineering through media. And then, of course, one of the more powerful triggers we're seeing lately is grievance. There are actually ransomware for hire services where if you are upset with your former employer, you can provide your login credentials online and an entire criminal organization will go after your former employer trying to deploy ransomware and split the profits with you. There was a real-life example of this without ransomware in the middle, where an employee was dismissed from the American College of Education, and held the school's Google password, their Google account, the school's Google email and all the other infrastructure services hostage, asking for a $200,000 payment, a ransom, if you will. So due to our short time, I want to make sure we have time for questions for the entire panel. I won't go through every element here, but what we're doing beyond the MICE framework that you've probably seen in some format in your social engineering training, we're helping people understand that reciprocation, if I give you a little bit, will you do one little thing for me, can often turn into an escalation of commitment. Authority can be used to leverage position to make you do something that you normally would not do. Scarcity, limited time only 3 spots left, you can join now. Commitment, consistency, well, you did this, you might as well do this next step, that escalation of commitment. These are the psychological triggers, liking and social proof. They get us to buy the latest product, but they also, unfortunately, cause us to fall for the latest cyber scam. So in conclusion, we want to use these frameworks to educate employees, citizens, soldiers, officers, to spot social engineering and other cyber threats from that counterintelligence perspective. And we believe that these frameworks can also be used by employers to identify insider threats, which is, of course, becoming an even bigger concern in the realm of cyber. And this counterintelligence approach begins with the realization that we are all targets. Dr. Papp, thank you.
Thank you, Bryson. And thanks to all 5 of our panelists, not only for excellent presentations, but also for staying within the time limitations. I did not even have to hold up my usual "your time is up" signal. So with 15 minutes, let's divide our 15-minute question and answer period into 2 parts. Part number 1, any of the presenters have questions or comments on anybody else's presentation? Going once, going twice. Okay, part 1 is very brief. Part 2 is now for anybody in the audience. Questions, comments, observations.
Good morning, everyone. Cadet Dlynn from the Citadel. My question is kind of directed more towards Dr. Payne and Dr. Williams, but is open to the entire panel just because they mostly covered what I'm going to ask about. So in the growing technological and the internet age, awareness on those topics is crucial, especially for our generation and really every generation. To ask the average college student to understand the complexities of computer science and hardware and coding, and it's a very daunting task, but something like cybersecurity and awareness and etiquette, as far as those concepts, can be broken down pretty simply into layman's terms and really explained to the masses. And my question is, how do you assess the viability in the future of potentially, general education courses being related to cyber as far as etiquette and awareness being on par with and required alongside other general education courses like history, mathematics, and literature?
Okay, I'll start. So I think one of the interesting trends in higher education was something called information literacy. So that was a trend probably about now 10 years ago. And the question was, how do we teach students to take in information, assess which really has value, and how do they process all of this? So I do think conversations about this began. I think the real struggle is that students aren't taught a step-by-step guide about how to assess if information is credible or not. And I think that that's where higher education can step in. And there are a variety of things that we can incorporate into our courses to assist students, and then they can share that with the general public, right? So I teach core curriculum courses here, which is essentially an Introduction to International Relations course. And one of the things I constantly tell students is, please go home and talk about this. Please go home and talk about this, because I can only reach so many that are in the course, right? But the conversations around Thanksgiving, I actually, the day before Thanksgiving break, we stop the class for the last half and we say, okay, what topics that we talked about in this course are you going to talk about around the Thanksgiving table? And what do you think those conversations are going to be like? I think that it's incredibly important because we, as the first speaker talked about, and also as Dr. Harris talked about, war is changing. And war is increasingly this gray, nebulous information, soft power, influence element. And I think that we have to, it's very easy to ignore those elements. As I tell my introductory students, they aren't as sexy, right, as some other more hard elements of war. But the issue is that you have to make sure your audience believes you, believes the credibility of your threat, believes in your communication. And it's important that we do that, and mostly we do that with all of those psychological elements that Bryson was talking about. We use that to also control our messaging and our information as a state. So, go ahead, Bryson.
Thank you. And I'll just say that you phrased your question really well. I think you framed it accurately. We've been aiming at awareness when really we want to get down to the practical behaviors, break it down so that an average person understands what not to do and what to do in a situation. I do hope that we do see more push for general education cybersecurity courses so that all students get exposed to this kind of information, not just intelligence and strategic studies students or cyber and computer science students, because it really is a practical matter for every individual, every citizen, every employee throughout the world. But I really like the way you framed it. We're really trying to push past awareness, because we've all been trained in phishing awareness, and it's just not working, at least at the level it should. We need to get down to the practical, small behaviors that push the needle. Great analogy is we're all aware that exercise and eating well is good for us, but we need those small practical behaviors, a little extra walking, park further away from your building, go up the hill, drink more water, eat healthier lunches. Those small practical behaviors in cyber are really what are going to move the needle for not just our organizations, but our nation as a whole.
And I think one of the first curricular changes we could impact is professional military education requirements. Right? I think that that's one place that we could have those impacts to make sure courses like that are integrated. Then we can move it to a more general curriculum if we desire to do so.
Let me throw a complexity out to the panelists. Years ago, there had been a movement to require additional language courses as requirements, particularly in college education. What you seem to be implying, perhaps, is that there's a need for required cyber education. What are you going to take away? Where are you going to put it in the curriculum? There's only so much you can put in.
Do you want me? Okay, I talk all the time, as you can see, so sorry. Yeah, I think one of the questions is we're looking at that in kind of the area of quantitative and qualitative reasoning. So I think we are expanding this. The University System of Georgia was trying to look at this as possibility in the core curriculum when we look really at how we handle data. So not just the mathematical manipulation of data, but how we handle data. I do think there's space in that space in core curriculums, but as we know in higher ed, core curriculums are not the same. If you've ever tried to transfer universities, you feel my pain, right? So core curriculums aren't the same across states or institutions, but I do think that's one place that we could look at as data management.
I think of math science, computer science, any kind of critical thinking course could easily, at least one of those courses might be swapped out. My math colleagues will disagree with me, so I'll have a conversation after.
This is mostly for Professor Williams. With encouraging interest in international affairs and the strategic study programs and cybersecurity, you talked a lot about professional organizations, military, government, NGO organizations, and spreading the word out that way. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think you're missing a critical audience with that, because people who are already in the audience seek out those specific discussions of specific groups already. You're not really reaching out to the common person out on the street with that. One thing I've noticed with the war in Ukraine, especially, is the extreme, like a real huge uptick in content, especially on like YouTube or other forms of media, by our standards, and especially by higher education standards, amateurs. These are people who just casually make videos. They do, but for the most part, what I've seen, they do very well researched videos, and the content that they actually specifically talk about can't necessarily be monetized on YouTube, which provides an excellent opportunity for higher education organizations such as ourselves to sponsor those content creators and to help encourage that discussion. For example, I actually sent Dr. Beal, one of the strategic study majors professors, an email about it like this past Sunday, because I just I had watched it at like an hour and 30-minute video that was exactly like one of his like lectures, and plenty of people were in the comments were saying this is something that, like, I'm in the UK military, this is something I'd get at the Joint Military College. And so that kind of content is something I think we should really start targeting, because I feel like higher education is within a bubble that can expand, but higher education would like to stay in higher education. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so my thoughts on that is you should follow our YouTube channel. So the Political Science and International Affairs Department, we do have a YouTube channel where we do issue videos about governmental kind of jobs, careers, etc. The other thing that I think is very important, though, is to balance that. So whenever I brought up to my introduction to international relations global issues students about Ukraine and the war, the first thing they knew was TikTok and the ghost of Kyiv, right? And so I was like, whoa, okay, so let's go back, because one of the things is what we know this amplification does is we amplify the hero, right? We amplify the stories we want to hear. And so students will pick up on those things. And the fear from the academic side is if we lean too far into that open media, we don't have the opportunity to vet everything. So one of the things that my department's been doing is we have co-sponsored with ILSS, and we've made it available, but we're struggling about sort of how we make this availability. Many of you have probably participated or been part of the Foreign Policy Association Great Decisions series and things like that. So we did that, and we essentially provided that via Zoom to students who would sign up through our portal, so that then we could see that they were in our portal. And I think through those efforts, our Ukraine discussion had 79 participants. And we are able then to guide those discussions with the individuals who are not me, because I'm not an Eastern European or specialist. So with individuals that have that speciality, to open up those conversations and to engage students in a way that'll help them grow and develop. So
one thing I want to put really quickly, while there's some good content out there, there's a lot of really bad content, and most people don't understand it. This is one of the reasons why you saw the Russians being very effective over the last 5 to 7 years. They built disinformation campaigns that were supported, and a lot of people bought into it. If you look at the issue of hybrid threats that the EU's talked about, that NATO's talked about, as a significant issue, the amount of crap that's out there, okay, that most people can't understand, that's absolute crap. Okay, and that's where the problem starts to become, is there's so much information out there that you cannot vet it unless you have a background.
And that's part of also why we've partnered with NATO, just so you know. So many of us partnered recently in a conference with NATO partners prior to invasion of Ukraine. And in that conference, we've been trying to help push some NATO information and NATO resources out. One of the other things, as all of you feel and know, is my students get overwhelmed with the opportunities I present them. So that's the second thing, right? How many contacts do you possibly want for ways to learn more when you're writing your midterms and doing your finals and everything else, right? So we're trying to limit that content to a certain extent, vet it ourselves to try to make sure students have those opportunities. But check out our YouTube channel.
We have unfortunately run out of time for an extremely interesting panel, so I want to thank all of the panelists for their presentations and for the discussions. I want to also thank the audience for your great attention. I have one other comment to make. The ghost of Kiev has just briefly been mentioned. There's been a lot of rumors back and forth about whether he really existed or whether he was a fabric of someone's imagination. I've got a picture of him training with a U.S. Air Force training group, including my son, standing in front of an Su-24 in the world of 2018. There's at least a small cadre of U.S. Air Force pilots who absolutely believe the man existed, but who also absolutely believe that his limited successful exploits have been overblown for propaganda reasons. Anybody wants to see a picture? Got it right on the phone. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate it, folks.